Between the years of 1881 and 1996, more than 150,000 indigenous children from Native American tribes were forcibly removed from their families and sent to residential schools that were ran primarily by the Catholic Church. Now, why haven't I ever heard about this growing up? About how they pretty much teamed up with the Canadian government to accomplish this? With the government's and the church's goal being the complete assimilation of these children into European Canadian culture, stripping them of their languages, traditions, and identities, and, of course, making these kids victims of heavy sexual abuse. So today, we're going to be looking into a tragic chapter in Canadian history. The role of the Catholic Church and the Canadian government in this, I'm just going to say it, genocide of Native Americans through this residential school system. A school system that, for over a century, aimed to destroy indigenous cultures and identities, as well as being a gathering ground for abducted children with no access to their parents, just to be abused. At these schools, children faced widespread physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. They were forbidden from speaking their native languages or practicing their cultural traditions. Children were beaten, whipped, sexually abused by church staff as punishment for misbehaving. Like, damn, like these aren't kids we're talking about here. Some survivors recount being struck with objects like wooden pointers, straps, whips, and even electric wires. And yes, malnourishment and starving these children were also used as punishment as well. Just straight up leaving these kids severely underweight. And many students testified to being sexually abused and raped by priests, nuns, and other staff members at these residential schools. With some of these accounts included them being sexually abused as a child by multiple perpetrators over long periods of time while in these schools and churches, by nuns and priests, with both boys and girls being victims of assaults like these, even making them cut their hair, forced to forget their natural tongue and culture, and forced to be Christians. One survivor's account paints a horrifying picture of life in these residential schools. Paul Dixon, who spent 10 years in these institutions, described them as fortress schools with dungeons, secret tunnels, towers, and steel doors.
Parents weren't told, here's what we're going to do to your kids when you drop your kids off. Here's what we're really going to do to them. That's not spoken of. They tell you that we're going to feed your children, we're going to look after them, we're going to educate them. And so it's very false and misleading what they were saying, because that is not the truth.
What is it like to come back here to this place?
I'd been away from here, away from this particular site for so many years, I just didn't bother with it. It could be just a cruel place, and so you have to know how to really stick up for yourself. You're a little kid. You don't have any adults to protect you. Adults can do what they want.
There was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and they concluded that the residential school system aimed to cause Aboriginal peoples to cease to exist as distinct legal, social, cultural, religious, and racial entities in Canada. They wanted to wipe them off the census so they wouldn't be regarded as legal entities or regarded as people anymore. And they had the help of the church to come put these views into motion. And as you all know, any opportunity to wipe another culture off the face of the earth, the church will be there for sure. And they damn sure was. The Catholic Church played a significant role in administering these schools and enforcing policies of forced assimilation. And what we discovered today in modern times about what was taking place in these churches and residential schools, it's absolutely disgusting. It's insane. I believe it all began in 2021, but there were discoveries of unmarked graves and burial sites containing the remains of Indigenous children at former residential school sites across Canada. And the world finally got exposed to the horrors in which the Canadian government and the church participated in. So I'll just read off some of the shit they discovered. So in May 2021, ground-penetrating radar detected the remains of 215 children buried at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. Remember, these residential schools were ran by the church, and some of these even acted as one as well. So keep that shit in mind as we go further. And next, we have another finding. In June 2021, 751 unmarked graves were found at the former Merivale Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan, and most were believed to be children. You hear that? 751 damn unmarked graves, with most of them believed to be remains of children? This is a prime example of a religious organization getting away with murder and still being able to operate after all these crimes and criminal allegations. They still get the right to hide their documentations and books from the government and the IRS, as well as being able to still operate tax fucking free, even with all these criminal allegations, even with all these crimes against them. This is dumb as hell. And there's plenty more that they found too in other areas and residential schools. The Williams Lake First Nation reported finding 93 potential burial sites near the former St. Joseph Mission Residential School in British Columbia. The Saddle Lake Cree Nation said they located 184 unmarked graves near the former Blue Quills Residential School in Alberta, including what is believed to be a mass grave of children, another one. Damn, children were buried in these unmarked graves, and this was going on up until 1997? Oh, it makes complete sense to allow this organization to still operate, huh? It makes perfect sense. And it's not just the Catholic Church as well. Oh, no. These burial sites were often located on the grounds or in fields behind the residential schools ran by churches like the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and others like the United Church of Canada. Many contained the remains of children who attended these schools and died from disease, malnutrition, abuse, or neglect, but they were buried without proper records or markings on their graves. And in most cases, not even letting the parents know of the death of their child. So y'all can't just say that is just the Catholic Church, because at the end of the day, most Christian denominations still listen to what the Pope says. Y'all just don't know it. I promise your pastor probably does. No matter if he's Baptist, Mormon, or Seventh-day Adventist, they have all been infiltrated by the Catholic Church and are now owned by the Pope. So the church has been running around trying to make apologies here and there. The government of Canada too. They've been apologizing a lot too. But me? Nah, I don't really respect it. Sorry. Because at the end of the day, Canada only ended the program because of the international community. Let's be honest. So apparently the residential school system in Canada faced increasing pressure and criticism that ultimately led to its closure. Though the process was not as instant as it should have been, this shit was gradual and it ended up closing over decades. So in the 1960s to the 1970s, the international community was pissed and disgusted. And for good damn reason too. There was growing international condemnation of the residential school system as a form of cultural genocide, violating human rights, norms, and the rights of indigenous peoples. And yes, according to the UN and their definition of genocide, what they classify it as, it states that genocide is a crime under international law that occurs when someone intentionally destroys a national, racial, ethnic, or religious group in whole or in part. This can include acts such as killing members of a group, preventing births within the group, causing serious mental or physical harm to members of the group, imposing conditions that are intended to bring about the group's physical destruction, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Alright, so let's see the first criteria, killing members of the group. This is definitely a strike for both Canada and the damn church. All those unmarked graves and dead children bones they found, the rampant sexual, mental, and physical abuse, which ties in nicely into the next one, causing serious mental or physical harm to members of the group. Damn, that's another strike. Y'all not looking too good. imposing conditions that are intended to bring about the group's physical destruction. This is definitely a strike as well. Seeing how the Canadian government and church officials would often enter these homes and communities and forcibly take children away from their parents and families with little or no justification provided at all. Sometimes even just snatching them off the damn streets and even from outside of their schools. Can you believe that? Try to picture this in your head. You got grown government fucking officials riding around snatching kids off the street, riding around doing clown shit like this? Kid stealing? I don't understand how y'all can accept orders like these from your higher ups, but hey, this is another strike for what's in line for a genocide. And you know, real quick, what made it worse in some cases? Parents were told they had to give up their children, and if they refused or resisted in any way, they faced threats of prosecution or jail time under the Indian Act, an actual law that was in place, and they would be arrested for failing to comply, and sometimes just simply be killed. And the last two criteria for genocide, preventing births within the group and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. I'm not too sure if preventing births from within the group happened here, but the last criteria, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, yo, that's another strike. Y'all were kidnapping kids and converting them to Christianity up until the damn 1990s. So this incident, this act of evil that was done by the Canadian government and the church struck at least 4 out of the 5 examples, criteria of what the UN classifies genocide as. So you guys up in Canada was just pretty much losing your funding and business opportunities from overseas and potentially losing all that tourist money because of this. You guys were losing respect in the international community for having this type of shit up and running in your own damn country. Up until damn near the new millennia? That's what made the government take this program out of play, huh? Organizations like the United Nations had brought attention to these crimes committed by the Canadian government, with them removing children from their families and cultures. And that's what put the pressure on the Canadian government to reform its policies and views on this Native American population. That's why it stopped. I wonder if this shit would have kept going past the 2000s if the world never found out about this situation. And please try to remember, this shit was taking place up until 1997. I had to say it again, 1997. And some even say longer than that. During his 2022 visit to Canada, Pope Francis acknowledged that the church's action amounted to genocide. He apologized for the evil and disastrous error of the residential school system.
E provo anche vergogna, ve l'ho detto, lo ripeto, provo vergogna, dolore e vergogna per il ruolo che diversi cattolici, in particolare con responsabilità educative, hanno avuto in tutto quello che vi ha ferito, negli abusi e nella mancanza di rispetto verso la vostra identità, la vostra cultura e persino i vostri valori spirituali.
In 2008, Prime Minister Stephen Harper formally apologized to former students of residential schools for the abuse, suffering, and cultural dislocation caused by the government's assimilative policies. In 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a specific apology to former students of the 5 residential schools in Newfoundland and Labrador that were excluded from the 2008 apology. The 2005 Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement also provided compensation payments to former students and established a $1.9 billion fund for healing and commemoration initiatives. And more importantly, in 2023, Canada agreed to also pay $2.8 billion to 325 Indigenous communities to settle a class action lawsuit seeking compensation for the loss of language and culture caused by residential schools, especially after the ground-penetrating radar revealed over 1,000 bodies and unmarked graves behind these churches and schools back in 2021, with most of them being children Yeah, these apologies and payouts are definitely in order. And to explain the Indian Act of 1876 a bit more, to help understand what the law was, well, let's just say that it gave the Canadian government broad powers over Indigenous peoples, including the ability to remove children from their homes and place them in these residential schools. Parents could be fined or jailed for resisting. And changes to the Indian Act in 1919 made it mandatory for Indigenous children aged 7 to 15 to attend these schools. 7 to 15 years of age, just making Christians at all cost, not caring about the consequences of their ways as long as they get more followers and what they want. Like, for example, in the 1960s, an incident known as the 60s scoop saw an estimated 20,000 Indigenous children taken from their parents and placed in non-Indigenous families, and just sent them all to these Christian resident schools. But man, these findings have provided serious evidence of the large numbers of Native children who never returned home from these residential schools, man, which aim to forcibly assimilate them by separating them from their families, languages, and cultures. The reports of rape, sexual abuse, mental abuse, and physical abuse, the attempted destruction of a whole culture and converting them to yours, man, this definitely represents one of the darkest chapters in Canada's history with this treatment of Indigenous peoples. And for the church, this is just another regular chapter in the long history of religious colonization. And yo, while these apologies and reparations are steps in the right direction towards reconciliation, it's very possible that it might be too late. Just think about it. How much of the culture out there is now lost to time because families got destroyed due to this law and the kidnappings? How many people died for no reason, just for resisting their kid being snatched away? How many kids got abused for no reason, just to be indoctrinated in another culture's religion, or to be wiped off a country's census? Yo, none of it makes sense. And dark sides of history like this, they all need to be brought more to the light. So thanks for watching, everybody. Let me know what you guys think. Like, share, and subscribe for more topics on the paranormal, conspiracies, and the dark side of the world. So my name's Michael. I'm signing off. Remember, everyone, be safe out there.
What residential school was, and still is a nightmare.
For more than a century, Indigenous children in Canada were taken from their homes and sent to residential schools to forcibly assimilate them into white society, and thousands were never seen again. Now, more than 20 years after the last school shut down,